Hey guys, welcome to another tutorial. In this episode we'll be painting a landscape environment, and we'll also try to add a little bit of VFX, maybe like some explosion or some force field to it, so something happening in the scene. And as usual, we'll be starting with a very simple Linework sketch and end up with the final result. My name is Victor, I'm a concept artist and illustrator working in film and video games. I really hope you guys will enjoy this video and find it helpful. Alright, let's start. Alright, so whenever I'm starting this type of paintings, I'm always starting with the fundamentals, and in this case it's going to be a very simple Linework sketch, and I'm just gonna spend enough time on it to establish my story and place my main elements. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on detailing things and trying to add additional information, because I'm gonna do that later on during the painting process. And for now, I think this is quite enough for me to continue and establish the mood. The way I do that, and a very easy way you guys can work on this stage, is to start by working with flat color. Block your main shapes first. Use colors from reference or from other images you might like, or from your mood board, for example. And this way it's very easy to kind of establish the mood if you start from the background, establish the color of the sky, and afterwards move on onto the foreground. Now in this case I used quite basic simple colors for the main elements, for the rocks, for the ground, and I'm spending some time adding some foliage in the background, and also little by little I'm working on the form, but not really thinking about it right now. For now I'm just thinking about the shapes I'm creating, the accents, and how I want everything to lead towards our focal point. You can also notice that I've added a little bit of color accent, like value accent, at the end of the cliff. Sort of highlighted that grass over there, maybe like the sunlight is hitting it somehow. And I'm also spending a little bit more time adding some elements to increase the level of detail around the focal point. Now, one thing to remember is you don't want to be inconsistent when you're doing this, right? You don't want to keep areas of your painting absolutely void of details and stuff like that. But you want to kind of manage it all together, right? So spend time across your whole image, and this way you will keep a level of consistency. That's going to be enough. And for now, I'm also thinking about how I can describe the foreground so that I have maybe some leading lines, because there's not a lot of perspective cues. And when they're not, like very evident perspective cues, like, lines leading in towards the vanishing point, it's sometimes not very easy to achieve depth for the image. And in this case, spending extra time on adding additional planes, working with atmospheric perspective. This way I can sell the idea that this is 3D space, seeing a bit of volume. Now I'm trying to add some accents across our focal point, and I'm using very basic tools. You guys can see that I'm simply painting right now. Sometimes I'm selecting a range of value by using Shift A in Photoshop, and I'm applying color to that selection. This way I can keep things a little bit organized, a little bit cleaner. But other than that, I'm just using selections and simply painting on top of it. And the layer system is not complicated at all. It's just layer on top of a new layer, on top of a new one, and so on. And if you see that something is not working, just delete the layer and start over. Slowly but surely I'm pushing the values a bit more. I didn't want to do it in the beginning of the image because I don't want to end up with a very high range of values, right? Because sometimes you end up having very dark foregrounds and lighter backgrounds because you want to have that contrast, and that happens usually if you're being very bold with your range of values. So you're applying really dark values and really bright values and mixing all of them at the same time in the image. So try to group your values and try to work at first with a limited range. It's really going to help you kind of keep a very organized and clear graphic look to your whole painting. And then of course you can add more details, more information, but just keep in mind that grouping values is really important, especially if you want to achieve a readable composition. And I'm spending a little bit of time onto that cliff. I'm trying to detail the ground over there, and I'm sort of thinking also about these planes, because the lower part of the middle ground is sort of inclined differently than the cliff itself. So I want to make sure that that is understandable for the viewer. I'm also adding some elements to place these rocks in the environment a bit better, so it doesn't look like they're just cut out in the environment and just placed on top of it. And also spending a little bit of time onto our focal point. I'm making sure that everything is readable, and I'm not sure if I managed to separate the cliff and the lower plane in the middle ground that well. Maybe later in the image I'll add some fog, sort of try to push it a little bit away. I wasn't even sure if these are separate, like is there any distance between the cliff and the ground above it, below it. And I was thinking that maybe there is like some lightning or some energy beam hitting the ground, like, and sort of creating a ripple effect, a very strong force field across it. And a really good advice for you guys is to really start looking for references before you approach this type of story. I didn't, but it will definitely serve you well, because I was trying to explore different ways to sort of create this shockwave and try to add impact to it. And I guess the first thing you should probably worry about is try to find the planes that are facing this light source and, you know, change their light, change their values, right? Because they're going to be affected by this bright light source. You can see that now I'm changing the values of the grass, changing the values of the rocks, trying to think which planes are facing it. So I'm adding that light. And now I'm just using an elliptical selection box, right? And trying to imitate that there is a force field, you know, a circular force field being expelled by this explosion. And I'm using very simple tools. I'm not, you know, photo bashing like I would do for my professional work or stuff like that, or 3D. I'm just using simple painting, brush work, and just the selection boxes. Really useful in this type of scenario, in a very specific type of scenario. I'm also trying to add a little bit more light across it, so sort of to push the focal point closer to us, to increase the contrast in those at the edge of that cliff. I'm gonna use some sort of glowing effect. And the way you can achieve it is if you collapse all the layers, because at this point there's no point in working in separate layers. I collapsed all the layers, and I'm using a mode called, I think it's called point light, and with a 30% opacity I'm going over this lightning beam and I'm adding a blue to it. So this way you can create a really nice glowing effect. I'm also emphasizing this sphere, this force field that is created by the impact, again using a simple elliptical selection box. And I'm also thinking maybe we could somehow sell the idea that there are like some airflow happening as well, or like some sort of capsule that is happening around it as well. And the way I did it is just use a blur filter, motion blur filter, and simply paint a little bit of, you know, a pattern with a lighter value. All right, pretty cool. At this stage, I'm basically looking across the whole image, trying to push some values away from the camera, making sure that everything is readable. I still haven't decided about, you know, the cliff, if I want it to be further away. I wasn't sure. Maybe it doesn't make sense for it to be further away. Maybe we want to connect it to the foreground somehow. I'm also thinking that I should emphasize these pathways, because there is not a lot of perspective cues, as I mentioned in the beginning, so maybe I'm gonna use them, sort of compositional lines, to lead the viewer's eye towards our focal point. And you can also see here that I'm adding a little bit of fog to separate the cliff, and just a few characters, very simple, just a couple of brush strokes to make sure that, you know, there is some indication of scale. So you can see some people over there, kind of giving you an idea of what's the scale of this environment. Now, in a couple of seconds, we'll have a look at the final image. Meanwhile, I just want to say thank you to everyone who subscribed and liked the videos on this channel. I hope you guys enjoyed this content and found it helpful. Don't forget to ask any questions or suggestions you have in the comment section. Also, big thanks to those who subscribed on Patreon. I hope to see you all in the next year and also in the next video coming soon.